At some point, you've probably found yourself having to argue something. You've also probably found yourself a little bit lost in that debate, not sure where or how to take it further. But don't worry, in this video, we're going to learn how to form coherent arguments that will elevate your essays. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Shane and I'm a doctor and neuroscience supervisor at Oxford University, and today I'm going to teach you how to form, develop and conclude arguments. Before we begin, let me give you a general overview. Firstly, what do we mean by an argument in the context of an essay? Well, an argument is a debate where there are two or more opposing viewpoints about a topic, and it's our job to present each viewpoint, identify any issues, provide evidence, and finally suggest which is more likely. Now, I think of arguments as generally being made up of 5 key elements: the hero, the struggle, the anti-hero, the battle, and finally the victory. The hero is the first viewpoint to be made about a topic. It's usually a historic viewpoint that scientists initially held. Then there's the struggle. This is where some scientists started to find issues and flaws with the original hero point and started to question it, usually because contradictory evidence is found. After this, there's the anti-hero point, which is when these maverick scientists who are identifying the flaws come up with an often opposing viewpoint. Following on from this, there's the battle, where evidence, flaws, and areas of improvement are all hashed out between the hero and anti-hero points. And finally, there's the victory, where the more likely viewpoint is identified, announced, and justified. This is the space for us to form our own opinions about each viewpoint and give a final verdict, which may side with the hero, the anti-hero, or even provide a kind of middle ground view. Now let's look at each of this in turn using this example essay question. Discuss the evidence for the dual center model of feeding. To provide some context, feeding is controlled by hunger and satiety, which is the feeling of fullness. The brain uses these hunger and satiety signals to start and stop feeding. Of course, it's more complex than this, and things like motivation, incentive salience, and hedonism all plays a factor in this. But let's stick to this simple mechanism for now. So this essay question is asking us to discuss evidence for a particular model, the dual center model, that explains how brain integrates hunger and satiety to control feeding. Now let's look at an example argument that answers this essay question. Here's an example of the hero point. The dual center model argues that the lateral hypothalamus and the ventromedial hypothalamus function as hunger and satiety centers respectively, that mutually inhibit one another. This model was developed as early lesion studies suggested that the lateral hypothalamus was a feeding center. Electrolytic lesions of the lateral hypothalamus produced profound aphasia, loss of eating, and stimulation of the same region induced eating in satiated rats. In contrast, lesions of the ventromedial hypothalamus cause overeating and obesity. Therefore, it was proposed that the ventromedial hypothalamus was a satiety center. Thus, it appeared that these two regions together were sensitive to hunger and satiety signals respectively and mutually inhibited one another. This section introduces the hero point by defining the dual center model. A diagram here will improve the clarity of the point that's being made. Anyway, it goes on to provide experimental evidence and relates it back to the question by re-emphasizing the dual center model. Now, if you've been watching my other essay writing videos, and especially my essay writing video course, then you might be wondering what happened to the analysis section of the pair framework. Well, in a debate, I saved the analysis for the next section, which is the struggle. Let's now take a look at this struggle section. However, these early studies only looked at very selective behaviors, and lateral hypothalamus lesions actually resulted in the loss of most motivated behaviors, not just eating. Similarly, lesion experiments that formed the basis of the dual center theory were found to be non-specific, damaging not just the intended area, but surrounding structures as well as structures passing through them. For example, it became clear that these electrolytic lesions not only destroyed intrinsic cell bodies within the lateral hypothalamus, but also fibers passing through the lateral hypothalamus, which included monoamine axons within the medial forebrain bundle, carrying dopaminergic innervations to the striatum. The struggle section identifies flaws in the experimental evidence used to justify the dual center model. The critical analysis highlights the restricted study method and the non-specific nature of electrolytic lesion studies. Then it goes on to offer possible alternative explanations for these findings. This sets us up nicely to introduce the anti-hero point. So let's take a look at this anti-hero point. As a result, doubt was cast over the dual center model and more specific experiments were undertaken that allowed more selective lesion and stimulation studies. Following on from this, the dual center model was disbanded. Additionally, the arcuate nucleus and the paraventricular nucleus were found to be vital and so integrated to form the integrated feeding model seen below in figure 1. The anti-hero section provides an alternate, often progressive and opposing viewpoint to the hero. Here it recognizes the issues with the hero, acknowledges improvements made, and finally introduces the anti-hero. Notice also the use of diagrams to optimize words and convey the new model clearly and coherently. Anyway, following on from this, the evidence for the anti-hero and hero points now need to be discussed in more detail, which is exactly what happens in the next section. Let's now take a look at the battle section. When selective excitotoxic lesions of the lateral hypothalamic cell bodies were made that spared the medial forebrain bundle, then more restricted feeding deficits were seen. So much of the previously seen deficit was due to damage to the medial forebrain bundle, which provides dopaminergic innervation to the striatum, essential for all types of movement. In addition, there is considerable recovery of function across time. However, residual deficits remain in the ability to respond appropriately to homeostatic physiological challenges that mimic dehydration, injection of sodium chloride, and starvation to DG treatment. As a result, the lateral hypothalamus, while still found to be important for feeding, was no longer seen as the hunger center it once was. Similarly, the overeating seen following ventromedial hypothalamic lesions was found to be due in part to disruption of axons between the arcuate nucleus and other hypothalamic regions such as the paraventricular nucleus and the brainstem nuclei. The ventromedial hypothalamus was found to have no major role in feeding and was no longer regarded as the satiety center it once was. This led to the development of the integrated feeding model seen in figure 1. In the battle section, a more detailed evaluation of the evidence for each model is seen. For example, evidence against the lateral hypothalamus as a major feeding center is given, and an explanation for the previous finding is seen. There's also a discussion of its more likely role based on more selective and specific experimental evidence. The same is seen for the ventromedial hypothalamus, and there's also introduction of evidence for 2 new structures that may be vital for feeding. Finally, a reference is made to the anti-hero, alluding to its upper hand in this battle. This is confirmed, of course, in the next section. Let's now take a look at this victory section. Therefore, the lateral hypothalamus, whilst important for regulating feeding, should not be considered as the feeding center as it once was. Similarly, the ventromedial hypothalamus, the satiety center of the dual center model, should no longer be considered as such. More specific and selective optogenetic experiments have disbanded the dual center model to make way for a more integrated model. This model proposes that the lateral hypothalamus functions along with the arcuate and paraventricular nucleus to coordinate hunger and satiety. In the victory section, a summary of the conclusions from this debate is discussed. Finally, it ends by naming the more progressive anti-hero as the victor of this battle. So there you have it, a 5-step approach to build a compelling argument in your essays. Remember, of course, to use active subheadings and diagrams throughout to keep your essay structured and coherent. If you'd like to find out more about how to write the best essay, then you might like to check out this playlist. Or if you'd like a more structured approach, then you might like to check out my essay writing masterclass. But that's it from me for today. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.